At first, it feels like progress. Your income rises, your lifestyle improves, and everything appears to be moving forward, yet something subtle begins shifting beneath the surface that most people never stop to question. Here's what most people don't realize. As income increases, spending often rises in parallel, quietly absorbing the gains that were supposed to create long-term financial momentum. This pattern is known as lifestyle inflation, but it rarely feels like a problem in the moment. It feels like reward, comfort, and a natural step forward in life. Over time, this creates a hidden system where effort increases, income increases, but financial progress appears strangely slow, almost disconnected from the work being put in. At first, this doesn't seem significant. A slightly better apartment, a newer car, more convenience, small upgrades that feel justified and earned. But when repeated consistently, these upgrades begin to form a pattern, one that quietly redirects money away from future growth and into present consumption. This is where the difference becomes clear. Not immediately, but over years, where small changes in spending behavior begin to compound in ways most people never track. To understand this, we need to step back and look at the system, not just the individual decisions, but how those decisions interact with time. Because lifestyle inflation is not about spending more. It's about how spending evolves alongside income, often without intentional control. And this is where the math begins to reveal something unexpected about why saving feels slow, even when income is growing. Consider a simple example. Someone earns $50,000 and saves $5,000 per year. That's 10%, a clear and measurable effort. Now their income increases to $70,000. On paper, this looks like progress, an opportunity to accelerate savings significantly. But instead of saving $7,000 or more, spending rises. Rent improves, lifestyle expands, and savings increase only slightly, or sometimes not at all. This is not a failure of discipline. It's a predictable behavioral pattern shaped by environment, expectations, and social comparison. Over time, this creates a plateau. Income rises, but savings rate stays nearly the same, limiting the ability to build momentum. Meet Trevor. Trevor works hard, earns more each year, and believes he is moving forward financially. But when Trevor looks closer, he notices something unusual. Despite higher income, his savings account doesn't reflect the same growth. At first, Trevor assumes it's normal. Life gets more expensive and better living standards come with higher costs. But here's what Trevor begins to question. If income is rising steadily, why doesn't his financial position feel significantly stronger? This question opens the door to understanding the system behind lifestyle inflation and the hidden math driving it. The key insight is not how much you earn, but how much of each increase is preserved rather than consumed. Because money has two paths. It can either be spent once, or it can be invested and work repeatedly over time. Lifestyle inflation shifts more money into the first path, reducing the amount that enters the second. And this is where the long-term difference begins to form, slowly at first, then more noticeably as time expands. Imagine two individuals earning the same income over 10 years, but making slightly different choices with each raise. One increases spending with each raise. The other increases saving rate gradually, even by small amounts. In the short term, their lifestyles look similar. Comfort levels rise, daily experiences improve, and both feel stable. But beneath the surface, the allocation of money begins to diverge, creating two different financial trajectories. This divergence is not visible immediately. It builds quietly, influenced by compounding and time. At first, the gap is small. A few $1,000s, nothing that feels life-changing, but over 5 to 10 years, that gap expands, not because of dramatic decisions, but because of consistent patterns. This is where the math becomes more clear. Money that is invested has the potential to grow beyond its original value. Money that is spent ends its journey immediately, providing value once, but not continuing to contribute. Lifestyle inflation increases the percentage of money that stops working early in this process. And over long periods, this creates a significant difference in outcomes, even when starting points are similar. This is not about restriction, it's about understanding how small shifts affect long-term systems. Trevor begins to track his raises. Each year he notices how his expenses rise almost automatically. He didn't plan it. It happened gradually through upgrades, convenience, and normalization. This is where behavioral economics plays a role. Humans adapt quickly to improve conditions. What once felt like a luxury becomes standard, and new desires replace old ones. This process is known as hedonic adaptation, and it fuels lifestyle inflation over time. As expectations rise, spending follows, often without conscious awareness. This creates a loop. Higher income leads to higher expectations, which leads to higher spending, and the cycle continues, reinforcing itself year after year. Breaking this cycle requires awareness of both behavior and system design, because without intervention, the system runs automatically. Over time, this automation becomes the default financial path for most people. This is why saving feels slow. Not because progress isn't possible, but because increases are absorbed elsewhere. The invisible cost is not just spending more, but losing future growth potential. Each dollar spent today is a dollar that cannot compound over time. And compounding is where long-term wealth begins to accelerate. Without it, progress remains linear, tied directly to income and effort. With it, progress becomes exponential, building on previous gains. Lifestyle inflation limits access to this exponential growth. Not entirely, but enough to slow the process significantly. This is why two similar incomes can produce very different long-term outcomes. The difference lies not in earnings, but in allocation. And allocation is shaped by behavior, habit, and environment. Historically, periods of economic growth have amplified this pattern. As wages rise and access to goods expands, consumption tends to increase. This was observed during post-industrial growth periods where living standards improved rapidly. But alongside this improvement, savings rates often fluctuated or declined because increased access led to increased spending opportunities. The system encourages consumption, not accumulation. And individuals operate within that system, often unconsciously. Trevor begins to see this clearly. His behavior wasn't random, it was shaped. Once he notices it, the pattern becomes easier to track. Each raise now represents a decision point, not an automatic upgrade. This shift changes how he views money entirely, not as something to spend, but as something to allocate strategically. Over time, this creates a new pattern, one that prioritizes future growth. Even small adjustments begin to compound differently. Instead of absorbing all increases into lifestyle, a portion is redirected. This redirection becomes the foundation of long-term change, And over years, the difference becomes visible, not immediately, but gradually as compounding begins to take effect. This is where patience becomes important, because the early stages feel slow, almost unnoticeable, but this is the nature of exponential systems. They start quietly, then accelerate over time. Lifestyle inflation interrupts this acceleration by reducing the amount of capital entering the system and limiting the time that capital has to grow. Time, more than anything, determines the outcome. Money invested earlier has more opportunity to compound. Money spent early never enters that process. This is the hidden trade-off behind lifestyle inflation. Comfort today versus growth tomorrow. Neither is inherently wrong, but the balance matters. And most people never consciously choose that balance. It is chosen by default through habits and environment. Trevor begins to shift this balance intentionally, not by eliminating comfort, but by controlling its growth. This creates a gap between income and spending. That gap becomes the source of long-term momentum. Over time, the gap widens slightly with each decision, and that widening gap compounds. This is where saving begins to feel different. Not slow, but building beneath the surface. Gradually forming a system that supports future growth. This is the perspective shift most people never reach. Seeing money not as static, but as dynamic over time. Understanding that small differences compound into large outcomes, and that behavior shapes those differences. Lifestyle inflation is not obvious, but it is powerful, because it operates quietly without attention, and influences decisions over long periods. Recognizing it changes how decisions are made. Each raise becomes an opportunity, not just an upgrade. Each expense becomes a choice, not an assumption. And each year becomes part of a larger system. Over time, this creates clarity. Clarity about where money goes and what it could become instead. This is where the real difference emerges. Not in income, but in awareness. Because awareness changes behavior, and behavior shapes outcomes. Over long periods, this becomes the defining factor, and this is when saving no longer feels slow, but part of a system that was always there, waiting to be understood.